The Zephyrian Academy's xenobiology class buzzed with nervous excitement as they prepared for what would become the most memorable field study in galactic history. Professor Veltar, a distinguished scholar with over 2 centuries of experience studying alien species, had handpicked 20 of her brightest students for this unprecedented mission. They were about to become the first Zephyrians to observe the eating habits of the mysterious Terran species up close. The research vessel, Scholarly Pursuit, hummed quietly through space as it approached the coordinates where the human colony ship waited. Inside the observation deck, students pressed their pale blue faces against the viewing ports, eager to catch their first glimpse of the legendary Deathworlders. These humans had only made contact with the galactic community 6 months ago, and already their reputation preceded them. Stories spread through alien networks about a species that somehow survived on a planet where everything seemed designed to kill them. Professor Veltar reviewed her notes one final time, checking the standard protocol for studying civilized species. Every developed race in the galaxy followed similar patterns when it came to nutrition. They grew algae in controlled environments, synthesized proteins in clean laboratories, or cultivated simple plant matter in sterile hydroponic facilities. The process was always peaceful, predictable, and safe. She expected the humans would demonstrate similar advanced food production methods, possibly with some minor variations due to their unusual evolutionary background. The docking procedure went smoothly, and soon the Zephyrian delegation found themselves stepping aboard the human vessel, New Horizon. The first thing that struck them was how different everything looked. Where Zephyrian ships featured smooth, curved surfaces in calming pastels, the human ship had angular metal corridors with bright lighting that hurt their sensitive eyes. Strange symbols covered the walls, and the air carried unfamiliar scents that made several students wrinkle their small noses in confusion. Captain Kim Day appeared around a corner, his heavy footsteps echoing in a way that would have terrified foe species. But his face lit up with genuine warmth when he saw his visitors, and he spread his arms wide in what humans called a welcoming gesture. His dark hair was slightly messy, and his uniform showed signs of recent activity, though the Zephyrians couldn't imagine what kind of work required such sturdy clothing. "Welcome aboard," Captain Kim Day boomed, his voice carrying easily through the corridor. "You picked the absolute perfect day to visit us. We're celebrating Seafood Day today, and you're going to get a front row seat to see how we do things around here." The translation devices worn by each Zephyrian student immediately began working overtime, trying to process the meaning behind his words. Seafood Day translated roughly to something involving ocean-based nutrition, which made sense. Most civilized species had moved beyond consuming actual living creatures millennia ago, instead creating synthetic alternatives that provided the same nutrients without the primitive brutality of harvesting animals. Professor Veltar nodded politely, assuming the Seafood Day must involve some kind of advanced algae cultivation ceremony. Perhaps the humans had developed particularly sophisticated methods for growing sea-based proteins in laboratory conditions. The term seafood probably referred to nutritionally optimized marine plant matter, carefully processed to provide essential vitamins and minerals. Chief Biologist Park Min stood nearby, watching the alien visitors with barely contained amusement. Her dark eyes sparkled with something the Zephyrians couldn't quite identify. She leaned closer to Navigation Officer Lee Su, who was trying very hard not to smile as he observed the confused expressions on their guests' faces. "Wait until you see how we source our ingredients," Park Min whispered, though her voice carried clearly in the metal corridor. Lee Su had to bite his lip to keep from laughing outright. Both humans exchanged a look that suggested they knew something their visitors definitely did not. The Zephyrian students shifted uncomfortably, their translation matrices continuing to struggle with unfamiliar terms that kept appearing in the humans' casual conversation. Words like lobster, crab, and calamari produced only rough approximations that made no sense in the context of civilized food production. Their devices kept suggesting these terms related to some kind of mobile sea creatures, but that couldn't possibly be correct. No advanced species would actually consume living animals when synthetic alternatives were readily available. Professor Veltar made careful notes on her portable recording device. documenting the humans' enthusiastic attitude toward their nutrition customs. She found their excitement puzzling but attributed it to cultural differences. Perhaps food preparation held special ceremonial significance in human society, similar to how Zephyrians treated their annual algae blessing rituals. The stage was set for what would become the most shocking educational experience in Zephyrian academic history. The humans led their alien guests through a series of corridors that seemed to grow more industrial with each step. Professor Veltar adjusted her recording equipment, expecting to document advanced food synthesis laboratories or perhaps elegant hydroponic gardens. What she found instead made her question whether her translation device was malfunctioning. The first room they entered looked nothing like any food production facility she had ever seen. Massive metal racks lined the walls, filled with objects that could only be described as weapons. Not ceremonial tools or harvesting implements, but actual military-grade armaments that belonged on warships, not vessels dedicated to nutrition. Procurement. Captain Kim Dae moved through the arsenal with casual familiarity, running his hand along what appeared to be some kind of projectile launcher. "We'll need the heavy gear today," he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "The season's just getting started, so they'll be extra feisty." Professor Veltar's students huddled closer together, their pale blue skin taking on an even lighter shade as their stress responses activated. The translation matrices in their devices were working frantically, trying to make sense of what they were witnessing. Every civilized species in the galaxy had moved beyond primitive hunting practices millions of years ago. Food came from controlled, peaceful environments where nothing suffered and no violence was necessary. "We're heading to the Maelstrom Nebula," Captain Kim Dae explained with the same tone he might use to announce a routine supply run. "Void Kraken season just started, and if we wait too long, all the good spots will be taken by other hunting." "Crews!" The Zephyrian students looked at each other in growing alarm. Their academic databases contained information about void krakens, but only in the context of hazards to avoid at all costs. These creatures were classified as Class Thuesthean extinction events, meaning they posed a threat to entire star systems. The very mention of their name in galactic safety briefings was enough to make experienced space travelers change course immediately. Weapons specialist Choi Bin appeared from behind a rack of equipment, dragging what looked like a cannon designed for ship-to-ship combat. His muscular arms handled the massive weapon as easily as a Zephyrian might carry a datapad. He began a methodical inspection of the device, checking various components while humming what sounded like a cheerful human melody. Chef Han So wanted me to ask about seasoning preferences, Choi Bin called out to the captain. "She's thinking garlic and butter for the tentacles, but she's got that new spice blend from the trade station if you want to try something different." The casual conversation about food preparation continued as Choi Bin loaded specialized ammunition into his weapon. Each projectile was the size of a small shuttlecraft, designed with wicked-looking barbs that extended once fired. Professor Veltar realized with growing horror that these weren't just weapons. They were hunting tools specifically designed to capture living creatures. Chef Han So emerged from a nearby preparation area, wiping her hands on an apron that had seen considerable use. Her friendly smile seemed at odds with the industrial-scale cooking equipment visible behind her. Massive boiling units, cutting implements that could section a small vehicle, and storage containers large enough to hold entire creatures filled the space. "I've been experimenting with different marinades," she explained to the stunned aliens. "The key is to start the flavor process before the hunt even begins. Once we bring them back, there's not much time before the meat starts to lose its freshness." Pilot Yoon Jae joined the conversation, carrying ammunition that glowed with an ominous energy signature. His casual laughter filled the weapons bay as he discussed tactics with his crewmates. "The trick is getting them angry first," he said, loading the specialized rounds into a launching system. "You have to really work them up, get their blood pumping hard. All that adrenaline makes the meat incredibly tender." The Zephyrian students were now experiencing what their translation devices helpfully identified as anxiety. though the emotion was so foreign to their peaceful species that many didn't recognize the sensation. Their breathing became rapid and shallow as they processed the implications of what they were witnessing. These humans weren't just planning to encounter dangerous space creatures. They were actively seeking them out, with the specific intention of killing and consuming them. The weapons, the preparation equipment, the casual discussion of cooking methods, it all pointed to a reality that challenged everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about civilized behavior. Professor Veltar's hands trembled slightly as she continued recording, knowing that her colleagues back at the academy would never believe what she was documenting. The humans moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for what they called a hunt with the same calm professionalism that Zephyrians brought to academic research. The ship's engines began to hum with increased power as they prepared to depart for the Maelstrom Nebula, where creatures of unimaginable danger waited in the cosmic depths. The moment their ship crossed into the Maelstrom Nebula's boundaries, the Zephyrian students knew they had entered a realm that defied every law of civilized space travel. The nebula wasn't the peaceful cloud of gas and dust that their textbooks described. Instead, it pulsed with malevolent life, as if the very fabric of space had developed a consciousness and decided it didn't like visitors. Massive tentacles, each one easily the width of a space station corridor, emerged from the swirling cosmic mists without warning. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so enormous, reaching out to test the strange new objects that had dared to enter their domain. Bioluminescent patterns ran along their surfaces in hypnotic waves of blue and purple light, creating a deadly light show that would have been beautiful if it weren't so terrifying. The Zephyrian observation bay had been specifically designed to keep the alien guests safe during what the humans cheerfully called their fishing trip. Reinforced transparent aluminum windows provided a clear view of the surrounding space, while multiple layers of shielding protected the occupants from the various forms of radiation that cosmic predators naturally emitted. The 20 students pressed themselves against these windows, unable to look away from the nightmare unfolding outside. Professor Veltar watched in stunned silence as the human crew prepared for what they casually referred to as the hunt. She had expected to observe some kind of technological solution, perhaps automated collection devices or remote harvesting systems. Instead, she witnessed individual humans climbing into single-pilot fighter craft that looked absurdly small compared to the creatures moving through the nebula. Commander Park Tay sealed himself into his cockpit with the same calm efficiency that a Zephyrian scientist might use when preparing for a routine sample collection. His fighter craft was sleek and fast, built for maneuverability rather than protection. Through the communication system, his voice came through clear and confident as he performed his pre-flight checks. "Remember, we want them irritated but not completely enraged," he broadcasted to his fellow pilots. "A little anger improves the flavor, but too much makes them tough and stringy." The human strategy became apparent as Commander Park Tay's craft shot forward into the writhing mass of tentacles. He wasn't trying to avoid the massive appendages that could easily crush his tiny vessel. Instead, he was deliberately provoking them, flying close enough to their surfaces that the creatures couldn't help but notice his presence. What followed was a display of piloting skill that violated everything the Zephyrians understood about physics and common sense. Park Tay's fighter danced between tentacles that moved faster than most species' military vessels, performing barrel rolls and impossible turns that should have torn his craft apart from the gravitational forces alone. The creature he was taunting responded with increasing frustration, its movements becoming more aggressive as it tried to swat the annoying little pest that kept buzzing around its hunting ground. The void kraken's eyes became visible as it turned its attention toward the human craft. Each eye was easily larger than a small planet, ancient and intelligent in a way that made the Zephyrian students feel like microscopic organisms being examined under a laboratory scanner. The creature's gaze tracked Park Tay's movements with the patience of something that had been hunting in the cosmic depths since before most civilizations had discovered fire. Marine biologist Kim Hai's voice crackled over the communication system as her own fighter craft joined the deadly ballet. "Beautiful specimen," she noted with scientific appreciation. even as she performed a spiraling dodge that took her directly through a gap between two massive tentacles. Look at those muscle definitions along the primary appendages. This one's definitely going in the pot. The casual way she discussed culinary plans while narrowly avoiding death struck the Zephyrian observers as the height of insanity. Kim Hai's craft suddenly accelerated as one of the creature's tentacles swept toward her position. The appendage missed her fighter by mere meters, but the displaced space matter created a shockwave that shattered several nearby asteroids into glittering dust. Pilot Yoon-jae's laughter echoed through the communication system as his own craft was pursued by appendages thick enough to wrap around a battle cruiser. He seemed to be enjoying himself immensely, treating the life-and-death chase as some kind of entertaining game. His fighter performed a series of loops and spins that would have made a professional stunt pilot weep with envy, all while tentacles, capable of crushing entire space stations, snapped at the space where he had been moments before. The sound of Yoon-jae's genuine amusement while being hunted by a cosmic horror proved too much for student Zefkil, who had been growing progressively paler throughout the display. The young Zephyrian's legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the observation bay floor in a dead faint, his nervous system simply unable to process the contradiction between mortal danger and human enjoyment. Professor Veltar knelt beside her unconscious student while continuing to record the impossible scene outside. The humans were not just surviving their encounter with creatures that could end civilizations. They were actively having fun while doing it. The return journey to the new horizon felt surreal to the Zephyrian observers. The massive void kraken, which had been a terrifying force of cosmic destruction just hours earlier, now hung motionless in the ship's cargo bay. Its bioluminescent patterns had faded to a dull gray, and the tentacles that had shattered asteroids with casual swipes now lay coiled and still. The humans had somehow managed to subdue a creature that entire galactic civilizations went out of their way to avoid. Chef Han-so stood at the entrance to what she proudly called her kitchen, though it looked more like an industrial processing facility to the horrified Zephyrians. The space was enormous, with ceiling-mounted cranes capable of lifting multi-ton sections of their catch. Specialized cutting equipment lined the walls, each device designed to handle materials that could resist conventional tools. Steam rose from multiple processing stations where various parts of the Void Kraken were already being prepared for consumption. The most important thing about cooking spaceborne creatures, Chef Han-so explained cheerfully, is timing. You have to work fast once the nervous system shuts down, or the meat starts to lose its unique properties. She demonstrated by approaching a tentacle section that was easily the size of a small building. With practiced movements, she activated a flash freezing unit that encased the appendage in crystalline ice within seconds. The process locked in what she called the flavor compounds that made cosmic predators so sought after by human gourmands throughout the galaxy. Professor Veltar watched in fascination and horror as Chef Han-so began dismembering the tentacle with tools that looked like they belonged in a starship repair bay rather than a food preparation area. Each cut was precise and purposeful, separating different sections based on what she explained were varying textures and flavor profiles. See how the muscle fibers change color along the length? She pointed out, as if discussing a particularly interesting scientific specimen. The sections closer to the brain have more of that sweet, delicate taste, while the outer portions are tougher, but have a richer, more complex flavor. The Zephyrian students clustered together in the observation area that had been hastily set up for their visit. Their pale blue faces showed a mixture of revulsion and curiosity that their species had never experienced before. Their evolutionary history included no concept of consuming other living creatures. Yet something about the aromas beginning to fill the kitchen space was triggering responses in their nervous systems that they couldn't understand. Massive boiling units throughout the kitchen began processing what Chef Han-so called the shell fragments, though these pieces were larger than most spacecraft. The specialized equipment extracted edible portions from materials that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Some sections glowed with residual cosmic energy, while others appeared to bend light around their surfaces in ways that hurt to look at directly. Sous-chef Lim Jun worked at a preparation station that could have doubled as a small factory floor. He was seasoning enormous steaks cut from the Void Kraken's main body, each piece weighing several tons and requiring industrial-grade equipment to handle properly. The steaks themselves were a deep purple color that shifted to blue when the light hit them at certain angles. Garlic butter brings out the natural sweetness, Lim Jun explained to Professor Veltar, who was trying to maintain her scientific composure while documenting everything she witnessed. Most people think cosmic predators would taste harsh or metallic, but they're actually quite delicate when prepared correctly. He demonstrated by applying what appeared to be several liters of seasoned butter to a single steak, working the mixture into the meat with tools that looked like they could reshape starship hulls. The aroma that resulted was unlike anything in the Zephyrian experience, rich and complex in a way that made their empty stomachs respond with unfamiliar sensations. The contradiction was breaking the minds of several students who found themselves simultaneously terrified by the industrial-scale butchery happening around them and inexplicably drawn to the smells and sounds of the preparation process. Their species had evolved on a peaceful world where nutrition came from simple plant matter and synthesized compounds. The concept of deriving sustenance from creatures that could destroy civilizations was so foreign to their psychology that their brains simply couldn't process it properly. Student Morkill began experiencing what the humans helpfully identified as hunger, though the sensation was completely alien to someone whose species had eliminated such primitive biological responses millennia ago. The aroma of cooking void kraken was awakening dormant genetic memories that predated Zephyrian civilization, triggering responses that their advanced society had long since abandoned. Chef Han So noticed the aliens' confusion and smiled warmly. "Would you like to try a small sample?" she offered, holding up a piece of meat that had been cooked to what she called perfection. "I know it seems strange, but trust me, once you taste it, you'll understand why we go to all this trouble." The offer hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about civilized behavior. The moment of truth arrived when Chef Han So approached the group of trembling Zephyrians with a platter of perfectly prepared void kraken samples. Each piece had been cut into manageable portions, though even these small servings were larger than what most species would consider a full meal. The meat glistened with herbs and seasonings, releasing an aroma that continued to trigger strange responses in the aliens' digestive systems. Professor Veltar found herself caught between scientific curiosity and deeply ingrained cultural taboos. Her species had spent millions of years evolving beyond the need to consume other living creatures. The very concept was so primitive that it belonged in museums alongside displays of stone tools and fire-making techniques. Yet the smell of the cooked void kraken was doing something unprecedented to her nervous system. Student Kefral was the first to overcome his fear. With trembling hands that shook so badly he could barely hold the offered sample, he took the smallest possible bite. His face immediately transformed with an expression that had no equivalent in Zephyrian emotional vocabulary. The combination of flavors was so complex and satisfying that it activated pleasure centers in his brain that had been dormant since his species' prehistoric ancestors. He stammered, struggling to find words. "It's actually incredible." This breakthrough opened the floodgates for the rest of the group. One by one, the Zephyrian students began tentatively sampling the various preparations that Chef Han So had created. The garlic butter steaks proved particularly popular, though several students were overwhelmed by the intensity of flavors they had never experienced before. Some had to sit down as their bodies processed nutrients in ways their digestive systems hadn't encountered in evolutionary memory. Captain Kim Dae watched the transformation with obvious satisfaction, sharing knowing looks with his crew members. They had seen this reaction before from other species who had been introduced to human cuisine. There was something about the combination of danger, skill, and flavor that created an almost addictive experience for creatures who had spent their entire civilizations eating bland synthesized nutrition. The feast continued for hours, with the humans sharing stories of their hunting expeditions while the Zephyrians listened in amazement. Tales of battling solar sharks near neutron stars, harvesting quantum eels from the edges of black holes, and the legendary pursuit of the great nebula whale that had taken 3 months and nearly cost them their ship. Each story was more impossible than the last, Yet the evidence of their success was literally on the table before them. Professor Veltar spent the remainder of their visit frantically documenting everything she witnessed, knowing that her colleagues back at the academy would struggle to believe her reports. The humans had not only survived encounters with cosmic horrors that most species classified as extinction-level threats, but they had turned these encounters into a cultural celebration centered around consumption and community bonding. Her final report took weeks to compile and even longer to work up the courage to submit. The recommendation for reclassifying humans from harmless herbivores to apex predator species with questionable survival instincts felt inadequate given what she had witnessed. How could any classification system account for a species that treated galaxy-ending threats as ingredients for dinner parties? The Academy Board's initial reaction was exactly what she had expected. The review committee dismissed her report as an elaborate work of science fiction, suggesting that Professor Veltar had perhaps spent too much time in deep space and was suffering from isolation-induced hallucinations. The formal response was polite but firm. Such behavior was impossible for any civilized species to exhibit. This skepticism lasted exactly 3 days, until a package arrived at the Academy's main campus. The return address identified it as coming from the human colony ship New Horizon, and the contents defied all reasonable explanation. Inside the specially designed containment unit was a live void kraken egg, its surface pulsing with the same bioluminescent patterns they had witnessed in the Maelstrom Nebula. Attached to the egg was a handwritten note from Chef Han So, complete, with detailed cooking instructions that covered everything from proper incubation timing to seasoning recommendations. The note included helpful tips like, best harvested when the shell starts showing cracks, and remember to remove the psychic resonance glands before cooking, unless you want your dinner guests to experience temporary telepathy. Captain Kim Day's accompanying message was characteristically simple. Dinner's always better with friends. Hope you enjoy this little gift from our kitchen to yours. The Academy Board immediately convened an emergency session to discuss the implications of Professor Veltar's report. Within hours, official communications were sent to every major galactic government, warning them about the true nature of the human species. The classification change was approved unanimously, though several board members suggested that apex predator species with questionable survival instincts still didn't adequately capture the reality of what they were dealing with. The cultural impact was immediate and widespread. Within months, Zephyrian restaurants across the galaxy began quietly adding Terran-style seafood to their menus. The dishes became incredibly popular, though most establishments were careful never to inquire too deeply into the procurement methods used by their human suppliers. The less they knew about how their ingredients were obtained, the better they could sleep at night. Professor Veltar returned to her teaching duties, but she kept Chef Han So's cooking instructions in her personal files, just in case she ever found herself in possession of cosmic predator ingredients. She wanted to be prepared to handle them properly. After all, as the humans had taught her, dinner really was always better with friends.